Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we have a special guest. We're joined by Raman Sidhu, who's a Vice President and Group Head of Learning Operations at Shell. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi Chris, I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just sort of taking in the background on Zoom right now. It's pretty cool. Tell us about that artwork you got behind you.
Thank you so much. So this piano is part of not just the furniture here. It's my daughter is a piano player.
Oh, cool.
And when she's in a good mood, she's a teenager. She plays some lovely tunes. She's getting trained as well. And the painting that you see back behind is actually a Chinese painting in two parts, which is the work that is done by my wife. She's fond of picking up stuff which she really likes, and this is the one she actually brought all the way from China. So I think, so this is part of my living room. I picked up a corner which is relatively quiet, and I've got time to speak with you here.
Amazing. Well, thanks for carving out the time. I know a big passion for you right now is the predictors of learning performance. Tell everyone a little bit more about that, and we can dive deeper into it.
So this is really the holy grail of learning, Chris. In today's world, what's happening is as we digitalize, as the new generation comes into the learning space and organizational space for that matter. So there are two ways learning is happening now. One is what we call learning in the flow of work. Yeah. So people would want to learn something as they are doing stuff. So call it nugget-based learning, call it I need learning when I need learning. So that's one part which is picking up rapidly and actually almost occupying a significant space in the portfolio of what organizations provide as a learning offering. Yeah. The second part, of course, is there is need for more structured curriculums, courses, and e-learning, gamified learning, simulation-based learning. Which requires a lot of preparation in terms of designing and developing it and actually offering to the target audience now. So from a learning professional perspective, and in fact from a business CEO perspective also, you would like to know that if I put money on the table, then what's happening to my money? What results it is producing? And of course, there are many models, so I won't go there. But what we've seen is the first line of actually checking how your learning interventions are doing is essentially to check whether there is bum on seat, the target audience I'm proposing an intervention is actually receiving it. So you get some feedback, some cheat sheets, and some basic level of information, which helps you to tactically understand, okay, I've delivered something, and so how is it being received? But of course, we know that's not enough. Yeah. That's not enough, of course. You would also like to understand if people are actually finding relevance of the training or learning they do and can actually apply to their roles, which is I'm a sales professional, I'm a supply chain professional, I'm a young leader, I'm a technical expert, I'm a customer service manager or customer service executive, and I've learned something and I can apply it to my work. So that's the next level of information that you start to get. From the predictors of performance, what we found is that many organizations kind of struggle, and we were also reflecting on it 2 years back, as to how do we start to measure if there is a change in behavior, and more importantly, if it is actually impacting the business performance you're looking at. Because essentially the whole skilling up capability game is to bridge a delta in performance, a business performance. And that's where we started to conceive the predictors of performance model in terms of actually looking at, so how can we come up with something which is easy to replicate, easy to understand? We don't have to boil the ocean here, and still we are able to provide something which provides the CEO an assurance that the money he's actually spending on learning, he or she is spending on learning, is actually producing the result which propels the capability agenda and helps to bridge that gap in performance.
Fantastic. And I'm sure that must have been quite a big change though, right? and the way of thinking internally. What were some of the sort of building blocks that you then had to put in place to make this happen?
I think when I put a global project team together, I think the first question that comes up from stakeholders is are you kicking off another piece of work which will require significant data mining and doing work for the sake of work itself. So I think the big worry is, does it require a lot of work? Does it require us to switch on a factory of data analysis and stuff like that, which people are really worried about? Because many folks are saying, hey, don't do this, just tell me broadly what you're doing. Does it work for the business? So that's fair enough. That's a fair challenge. But at the same time, when you present them the simplicity of the concept and how easy it is to implement, they start to see value. So just to then dive into a little bit of very early on in terms of how the model works is, if you have a delta in performance, let's say you want a certain market share globally or in a region, or you want a brand preference score in a particular market, or you want certain supply chain efficiencies to happen in your system, and so on and so forth. It could be any business outcome. And there is always that delta that you want to close because you're pursuing a higher level of performance each time. What we found is that to reach that higher level of performance or to close the gap in that delta, there are some predictors of that performance. What you can do is through data analysis, you can actually do factor analysis. You can get correlational and causational evidence as to which are those 5 to 7 factors which actually influence that performance. So as an example, if you're looking at sales performance, then you'll say, okay, what might work is that the quality of team leadership is super important for sales performance to improve, or market intelligence, or sales professionalism, or for that matter, discipline, the rigor of the daily beat, or some technical learning that has to happen. I'm just giving you some examples.
Yeah,
so
these could be.
So when you look at the factor analysis, you're saying, okay, these 5, 6 factors have a correlation of anywhere between 0.6, 0.7, or even higher. So then you're reasonably assured that if these 5, 6 factors are in place, then this performance is likely to happen because there's correlational and causational evidence. And you're likely to realize a performance improvement and a sort of a reduction or a sort of a compression of the performance gap. Now, from a learning perspective, what it means is that I want to influence these 5 to 6 factors. Because the moment I start to influence these 5, 6 factors correlationally, then I am working in a direction strategically and tactically to actually improve the performance. I think one mistake many of us in learning do is, or make, is that we tend to say, I introduced a course and sales increased, or I introduced a curriculum and market share improved, or brand preference improved, or supply chain performance improved, or leadership scores improved. Now that's a bit of a fallacy and a bit misleading.
Yeah.
Because based on the model, what we've learned is that it's not just one-off, it's no direct relationship here. It's a relationship to a set of factors which actually play out in each of the performance gaps that we're talking. So from a learning design perspective and strategy perspective, you would like to design something which influences these factors. So your correlation is not with the business outcome, but with the predictors of performance, which we call, these are the predictors of performance. So you want to influence these predictors of performance. I want to make sure that the team leadership scores go up. I want to improve the quality of team leadership. I want to improve sales performance professionalism. I want to improve the drumbeat that happens. I want to make sure my team is technically and product-wise skilled up. So you start working on those parameters and then work backwards to design an intervention. And what we've seen is that when you present that sort of an information to your business partner, to your CEO, he or she then is convinced that the money is well spent. And that's the right way to sort of look at actually deploying a model which works.
Mm-hmm. That kind of goes to another question I had was, is learning ROI a good measure of learning effectiveness? Seems like your answer will be no.
My answer is absolutely no, because I think the question itself becomes a little irrelevant, because let's assume I'm the CEO and I give you $1 million and saying, hey, Chris, run something for me. And then I'm asking, so what is my return on investment? So will you put up a number? Is it 30%? Is it 15%? I would actually move the conversation away from there because this is different. Because we are dealing with humans, we are dealing with teams, we are dealing with organizations here. What works here, and I think any CEO will buy that as well, is the fact that if I am able to predict that these are the factors that actually are going to help you achieve that performance, and it's just not just through learning. So we have to improve the quality of leadership, culture, strategy, market intelligence, competitiveness, pricing, and yes, of course, learning as well. But learning then plays into all these parts because when you start to design courses or interventions or learnings or e-learnings or whatever, you are actually trying to correlate your course effectiveness with each of the factors. And hopefully, collectively, they start to work on the end result. But having said that, I think there's a bit of humility also that is required among us in the learning community globally and everywhere, that you must also be willing to accept that everything is not about learning because organization is a system, and within that system there are multiple things at play, and the organization itself is part of a marketplace which is a larger system. Yeah, so there could be industry trends, there could be disruptions happening digitally or pricing wise, or for that matter the cyclic nature of that business itself. So one has to keep a more broader context within which you are trying to introduce capability building.
This is a big shift though, right? From what the traditional model that exists. What advice would you give companies on how they can apply this model in their own organizations?
So it is indeed a shift for us as well. But what I've seen is that in the past, organizations have made attempts. So, for example, if you look at the Kirkpatrick model, which is where I'm quoting most of my stuff, I think it has four ladders. You know, L1, L2, L3, and L4. At L1 and L2, you typically measure bum on seat and the relevance of the program to the audience you're talking about. And L3 levels start looking at shift in behaviors and new behaviors which are desirable to help the organization move in terms of a performance excellence space. The difficult part is the L4, which is how do you demonstrate a relationship between what you're doing in terms of capability building or learning and business performance. So that's a space which has always been the holy grail, as I mentioned earlier, and a bit of a struggle. And I have spoken with many organizations outside Shell where we've tried to learn what they're doing. We've tried to see what has been their methodology. And what we're finding is that the challenges have been quite similar, and in some ways frustrating as well, because then the whole narrative starts to shift towards what is the ROI, which I believe is an irrelevant question in the first place, because there is no ROI of learning. Let's admit. If you have to look at from an ROI perspective, just a concept, I think the ROI should be when I put something in place, when I introduce an intervention, can I influence the factors that actually influence the performance? And if I can do that, and if I can demonstrate that relationship correlationally, then I think we're doing the right thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's been the reaction from the different line managers, business unit leaders in the organization that you're working with?
From a learning community perspective, from the way we position ourselves as learning leaders, I think it is a space which still needs to be fine-tuned, because what I'm speaking about is performance management here, mm-hmm. Or performance consulting, to be very specific. So when you are consulting for performance, and you almost can imagine that while you are within the organization, you almost work as a consultant.
Yes.
So you sit with a business head, a regional head or a global head or a CEO, and saying, okay, you are uncomfortable with a part of your business performance in the P&L or at a strategic level. And when you start to diagnose that, and there are elements of organizational development or OD and consulting that start to appear there, because you're looking at diagnostics there saying, so what is stopping us from achieving what we wish to achieve? And then when you diagnose that gap, you look at elements of leadership, culture, process, people, and of course, performance. Now, when you look at it from a holistic perspective, you start to distill, okay, the problem to every solution is not a course or a curriculum or a learning intervention.
That's what I mean, because I'm sure they think that you're just going to come in and say, here's a new course, here's a new curriculum, it's going to solve all the problems, right?
And that's the easiest thing to do, Chris, because if you ask me, if I don't want to be a performance consultant, then the easiest thing for me to go to a CEO is saying, okay, I've got a problem. Can you design a course? And I go ahead and design a course or a curriculum. I introduce it, I spend money, and I report back saying out of the 2,000 people, 1,800 people have taken the course, they like it, this is the feedback, and everybody's happy. Yeah. Now, so that keeps everybody busy. You look busy. You're doing workshops, you're doing e-learnings, you're doing virtual learning events. But then you start to sit back and reflect, has it improved the performance? Has it really improved the performance? And that's a very difficult conversation to have with yourself first, and with your team, and then with your business partner, actually.
What's been the project you've worked on with this approach that you're most proud of?
So I think one area where I'm really proud of deploying this model has been that 2 years back, and this is before pandemic, I was asked by my CEO to scale up and to build capability in the digital domain for our key leaders. Yeah, and so that was the opportunity where we really wanted to deploy the model. And so I asked him the question, and I said, so what is the outcome you're looking at? And he said, I want a significant impact or a visible impact in the P&L of the organization, in the profit and loss account of the organization. So then we said, okay, so what does that mean? So we started to identify what was the gap, business performance gap that we were really after. So that became the starting point. And then we started to think about, okay, so what is going to predict that outcome? I had the fortune of working with the IMD team at that time in Lausanne in Switzerland. And so their professors were working with us. And I remember working with Dr. Jennifer. And so we started to think through, and I presented the model. I said, okay, so let's look at what are the predictors of digital capability for senior leaders. Yeah. And based on the experiences they had with many other clients and what we had within Shell, we distilled down to 3 of them. We said there is cognitive capability required as far as the domain of digitalization or digital is concerned. And we want to spend not more than 20% of our leaders' time understanding that. And the second part was behavioral, saying, if you want to build digital capability for leaders, then it requires a shift in how you operate. So from a structured, organized way, you want to work in an agile way. You want to fail fast. You want to allow thousands of flowers to and experiments to blossom all around the world, and you should be okay with that sort of ambiguity and uncertainty. So that's a shift in behavior. So we said we want to work on the leadership behavior as well, and we said that should be about another 30%. But the 50%, the balance was actually to look at a project that each leader would bring. And then you apply the principles of saying, okay, I'm going to work in the B2C space or B2B space, in supply chain or in sales or in marketing. And that's where I want to create an opportunity which is commercial in nature, applying these principles, and then create a financial outcome, a business outcome, a commercial outcome, which is visible in the P&L of the business. So it was almost 9 to 10 months blended program where we pushed the whole cognitive part actually to the pre-work. Because at senior leadership level, we were reasonably assured that people would have enough time and interest and enthusiasm and motivation to actually absorb what is robotics, what is AI, what is advanced analytics, and so on and so forth. So we expose them to the domains of digital, which I'm saying is easily available today if you were to Google or go to any big university around the world. I think everybody's teaching that, yeah? Mm-hmm. I think the big differentiator was to expose them to the behavioral elements of how to be a smart digital leader in the world of today and tomorrow, and which was actually quite a aha moment for many of our leaders, because saying, hey, I have not worked like this. This makes me uncomfortable. This is a different space for me, and I need to learn. And so we then gave them executive coaches and as well as digital coaches to help them saying, okay, if you want to operate in a more nimble, agile, quick, fail fast space, the whole paradigm of leadership has to shift in your head first. And then finally, of course, Chris, they had to work on a project. They brought a project there. We put these projects, and there were good 35, 40 of these global leaders who were actually then flown over to Lausanne in Switzerland for a face-to-face workshop with the professors at IMD, where we said, okay, let's fine-tune your project. Let's work on your project. Let's clear some doubts. Let's have a challenging session. And the summation of which was that, and I can't quote the number, but it was a significant number in millions of dollars that we actually put on the table, which was a delivery outcome. So that has been the most satisfying experience of actually deploying the predictors of performance model.
Wow, I'm glad I asked that question now. It's a very cool story, and it's those individual projects which were linked to business challenges or focus areas, which then of course had a direct correlation with the return on investment.
Absolutely, and I think the one key lesson, Chris, for me personally and for our team has been that in the commercial space we operate in, and that's where we are. I think building capability for the sake of it doesn't make sense. Of course, everybody realizes that, because you are building capability and skill for an outcome. I think what has been missing for very long is how do you bridge that gap? How do you provide a model that is easy to replicate, that is easy to deploy, and something that's not requiring months or years of significant investments of data analytics or data mining? It's all there. I'll give an example here. If you look at, let's say, from a sales organization globally, what you would want is you would want to look at last 2-3 years of financial results of each of those sales account managers. Yeah, you would like to see the engagement scores of their team leaders. You would like to see how good they've been in terms of recording or working on their coaching data. So there is a database that works to capture that. You would look at how's the drumbeat going. So let's say a day in the life of a sales professional, or a week in the life of a sales professional, or a month in the life of a sales professional. So these are multiple databases which capture different parts of the life of let's say, a sales account manager or a sales manager. Now, when you dump all this data together and you run some algorithms behind it through advanced data analytics, very soon you start to see a cluster of factors which have the highest correlation with the business performance or with sales performance. Mm-hmm. Now that gives you the clue that if I want to design something as a curriculum or as a program or an intervention, I have to make sure that these 5 factors have to move in terms of where they are to where they should be. Once you cross that gap for each of the factors individually and collectively, you are in that sense then trying to influence significantly the business performance itself. So it's as simple as that in terms of conceptual model and actually getting the database to play with it. Yeah.
Absolutely love it, Rami. Thank you so much for walking us through the model and, more importantly, providing some actual practical applications and a great example of how you've done that at Shell. I'm sure our listeners are going to be really excited to go and chat with their teams, although it's not going to be easy, I'm sure, to make a change like that in many organizations. Before we jump into our quick fire round, if there was one sort of piece of advice you'd give to people that would go on a similar journey, what would that be? What are the things they should keep top of mind?
And that's an interesting question because when I go for external conferences here in Singapore and in other parts of the world, many times, I've asked my colleagues in learning and in HR for that matter, as to how was your business performance last month? And I'm really hoping that few hands would go up, but unfortunately, that's not the case. And then we start to ask, so how was the performance in last quarter? And that gives you the clue where we are. And especially for the learning folks, I think it's important to get really anchored and hooked to what is the business performance we're talking about. So access to business performance data, access to the analytics behind it. Why is the sales performance not looking the way it's looking? Why is the supply chain efficiency not what it should be? Why is my safety and HSSC data looking shorter than our ambition? Now, so the first point is actually access. You should have access to it. The second point is, of course, curiosity in terms of understanding what it means. So it's not just the access of a report. Anybody can get a report and it just lies in one of your files. But to actually start to dissect it, analyze it, sit with your business partners and understand what is the story behind. And so that curiosity is one advice I would really give to all my colleagues in learning, because that's your ammunition. That's where your art starts to, blossom, because you need to understand which problem am I trying to solve here.
Love it. Well, I'm going to jump into the quick fire round, Raman, now, which I go ask every single guest. You have 30 seconds for each question. Are you ready?
I like it.
What are your passions and hobbies outside of the office?
Two hobbies I would particularly mention. One is I'm a trained yoga teacher. So I'm trained in Ashtanga yoga. And so I went through 200 hours of rigorous yoga training myself.
Wow.
I'm a practitioner, and I haven't taught as yet, but I think at some point I do wish to, share it with others. But from a personal energy and resilience perspective, I found it really helpful during the pandemic, especially because of the lockdown. And that's where me and my wife actually took the step of, getting all the way down to the rigor of a teacher training course. So that's one thing I really am passionate about. The secondly, I'm also a volunteer in the mental health space, something that's really dear to me. So me and my wife, again, we volunteer over weekends in providing pro bono therapeutic help to couples, families, and individuals. We are trained in the therapeutic space. So, for example, the Gottman's therapy or CBT or RABT or narrative. So that's a space which we are both connected. I'm deeply connected, and it's our way of giving it back to the society here in Singapore.
Well, that's incredible. So I would love to we talk more about that on the next podcast. I wasn't expecting that. That's incredible that you do that and and spend time to give back to people. That's amazing. If you could click your fingers and change one thing about the learning profession, what would you change?
I think the one thing I would like to change is absolutely to bring attention to business results, to business outcome, the analytics behind it, the reasons behind it. And the reason I say it, because we are just too caught up in designing courses, running interventions, facilitating them. Sometimes we lose the reason or the understanding as to why is this happening in the first place, and how does this influence the performance. So I think that's the invitation to my colleagues all around the world to spend more time there, because that's where your art, your learning professionalism can really make a difference to the business here.
How do your family, friends, etc. describe what you do for a living?
That's funny, because we got two teenagers at home, and they feel that. So me and my wife, we both in HR, and they're saying, okay, so you work with people, you're on calls all the time, but we really don't know what you do,
Yeah.
And then we try and explain that, we are into people development and capability and of course the whole people engagement and employee experience. So they get a bit of it, but I think, it's a tough one. And they're a different generation also, yeah.
Yeah. So your wife's in HR as well?
Yeah, she's in HR, not in Shell, in a different company.
Cool.
So she works for Barry Callebaut, yeah.
How did you meet, if you don't mind me asking?
We met through a dating site, and it was not planned to be that we had to be from HR. but from being from HR also has its pluses and minuses. I think sometimes the language at home tends to be more HR-like, saying, may I engage you? Can I have a conversation with you?
At least that's hilarious. At least you have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we have a lot of common things to talk about. And also, I mentioned about the volunteering piece we do together. So the last 8 to 10 weeks, we've been involved with the local community here in Singapore, and they ran a campaign for the Sikh community here, and the title of the mental health campaign was Theek Tak, which means "Are you okay?" And the whole idea was to then invite interest in terms of understanding that what mental health is and the stigma associated with not coming forward to actually seek help.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we found through our team that it's a small community. You really don't want to declare that I have a mental health issue or a relationship issue or anything related with it. So we ran a campaign on Facebook and IG and through live sessions where we were inviting people to open up by giving examples saying, I have suffered from this, I have dealt with this. And we're hoping through this initiative, we are able to invite people to speak up, seek professional help, and normalize the whole understanding of the stigma associated with mental health.
Yeah, I know firsthand with my own battle with anxiety, the stigma attached, and I hid that for many years until I heard others speaking up, and that was what helped me. Hearing other leaders that I looked up to be vulnerable and speak about their challenges is really what helped me start to speak about it and seek help as well. So yeah, keep up the amazing work. You're obviously making such a huge difference on that. I have a few more questions, and before I let you go, what's the biggest investment that you've made in yourself?
So I think the biggest investment I have made is experimentation. Because if I look at my career in Shell, I started in frontline function and top line functions like sales, moved across to marketing, moved across to supply chain, and then to HR, and then of course to learning and OD. So I think the desire to be curious and experiment has actually kept me going. And as you can sense, my passion for mental health and the space we are contributing towards, that is something I would like to do post-retirement, something we would really want to continue doing for as long as we can and contribute and give it back to the society. So I think my biggest investment has been just sheer experimentation and taking risks.
Yeah, it's no surprise that you ended up in the learning function. If you think about it, right, you were in sales and you had this raw desire to learn everything about sales, and then you moved into supply chain as a supply chain leader. And again, that thirst for learning and development, and you somehow ended up in the function which is responsible for that or helping that. So it makes sense the way you got to where you are, because that hunger for learning and pushing the boundaries and as you said, experimenting. Yeah, love it. Who's the one person in your career that's had the most impact on you?
That's a difficult one to answer, because there have been many people who've had a influence on my career. Actually, the big shift in my career was when I moved from supply chain to HR and specifically to learning and OD. There were two people actually who had a big influence on my decision to progress, and they were also my mentors and encouraging me. One was he's retired now from Shell. His name is Gavin Prince, and he was the VP for learning for downstream, and he's based in the UK. So he said, okay, I know you and I'm willing to mentor you, which was a very good decision and bold decision for him, because I was absolutely raw and fresh. So that really helped me understand the nuances and the whole pedagogy and the art of learning. And the second person at that time, I was based in India, was Archana Bhaskar, who was the VP HR for India. And in one of the random meetings, I said, would you mentor me to step into HR? And she looked at me, and without blinking, she said yes. So it was these moments, which I didn't create; they just happened.
Wow, love that. And then very last question: what advice would you give to the leaders of tomorrow?
So I think the future is, of course, looking more and more uncertain, and so technology is coming in a big way. The learning needs are changing. Of course, in a cliched way, the VUCA world is what it is. So I think if you were to look at what lies behind that statement or that acronym, is that the bite-sized learning, learning in the flow of work when people need it, and a technology that enables people to actually learn when they require in short space of time, quick answer. I think it's going to become more and more dominant in the future. Our learning management systems, our whole philosophy in learning, our whole philosophy in HR for that matter, from an employee experience perspective, has to keep pace with that. And I think that's a huge challenge for many of global HR leaders in terms of really keeping pace, and sometimes not even keeping pace, but actually looking ahead, looking at those trends. So I think that's a significant shift that I'm seeing, and I think we should invest as leaders, as people in that space. And the second part, which I would also mention, is that the world of tomorrow is easy to predict when you start doing scenarios which are like few years, 5 years, 10 years longer. But I think the planning cycle is getting compressed. We won't have the luxury of having a 2 year, 3 year, 5 year planning cycle. I think it's more shorter, nimble approach, change the agility required by the organization and leadership to swiftly move and take advantage or optimize on the opportunities that are there in the market.
Amazing. Well, look, thanks. So I've really enjoyed this. I feel like we need to do another one. I love to do. There's so much more to learn about you and personally and professionally. But thank you for spending the time. I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure, Chris. This was lovely chatting with you, and look forward to many more in future. Yeah?
Fantastic.